every so often, someone tells me the American West is gone. They say all that's left are museums and old photographs and reruns of classic westerns. And I understand why people say it. The open range is smaller than it used to be. Family ranches fight to survive. Small town rodeos struggle to find volunteers, and many of the people who grew up living this life are getting older. From a distance, it can feel like the story is coming to an end. But I don't think it is. I think we've simply forgotten where to look. Howdy, Chip Schweiger here. Welcome to another edition of Way Out West, where the stories of the American West are told, cowboy wisdom is earned, and the legacy of the American cowboy still rides on. The West has always been a place of long horizons, places where you can watch a thunderstorm an hour before it reaches you, where the wind carries the smell of rain, fresh cut hay, or sagebrush across miles of open country. It's easy to think that's what defines the American West, but landscapes by themselves don't create a culture. People do. Every generation inherits more than land. It inherits ways of working, ways of speaking, ways of helping a neighbor, ways of keeping promises. And whether those things survive has never depended on monuments or museums. It has always depended on people. So today on the show, we're going to look beyond the legends and spend some time with 5 people who, in their own quiet ways, are carrying the American West into its next chapter. Now, before we saddle up, remember that you'll find additional resources for today's episode in the show notes at wayoutwestpod.com/keep the West alive. Welcome back. If you've listened to this podcast for very long, you know I spend a lot of time talking about history. Trail drives, outlaws, ranches, cowboys, the people who built the American West. But history has a funny way of convincing us that important stories are always behind us. The truth is, the West has never survived because of famous people. It survived because ordinary people quietly decided it was worth carrying forward. People whose names almost never appeared in textbooks. People who probably wouldn't consider themselves guardians of anything. Today, I'd like to introduce you to 5 of them. Not because they're extraordinary, but because they're exactly the kind of people who have always kept the West alive. One of the finest horsemen I've ever known could have chosen almost any life. He went to college. He had opportunities that might have led to offices instead of barns, regular hours instead of daylight and weather, predictable paychecks instead of seasons. Instead, he chose ranch work, not because it was easy, but because it felt like where he belonged. Over the years, he became much more than a ranch hand. He trained horses, he guided folks through remote country, he spent weeks where the nearest pavement was hours away. He's the sort of person who notices a loose shoe before anyone else does, who fixes a gate because it needs fixing, not because someone asked, who understands that animals don't care whether you're tired, and neither does the weather. We often celebrate ranch owners, historic brands, legendary outfits, but ranches have always depended on people exactly like him, people who quietly shoulder responsibility because somebody has to. Frederick Remington believed he was painting the last generation of cowboys, and that was more than a century ago. Yet every morning, somewhere in the American West, someone saddles a horse before daylight because cattle still need checking. Maybe they don't make headlines, but they still make the West possible. Watching him taught me something. Traditions don't survive because people admire them. They survive because somebody keeps practicing them. And sometimes somebody keeps making the tools that make that work possible. Not far from where I live is a leather shop. Walk inside and you'll smell it before you see it. Fresh leather, neat's foot oil, beeswax. The quiet rhythm of hands that have repeated the same motions thousands of times. The man behind the bench didn't inherit a famous name. He didn't begin with customers waiting outside his door. He simply kept showing up. One belt, one holster, one notebook, or one saddle repair. One customer at a time, year after year, piece after piece, until something remarkable happened. People stopped asking whether he was good, and they started asking whether he had room on his waiting list. His order book filled, not because he advertised louder than anyone else, but because quality has a way of traveling by word of mouth. Cowboys have always known that. Long before online reviews, a man's reputation rode ahead of him. On the frontier, craftsmanship wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of trust. A cowboy might never know the name of the person who built his saddle, but every day he trusted that person's work with his comfort, his livelihood, and sometimes his life. Craftsmanship isn't just preserving old skills, it's preserving standards. And standards are part of culture too. But even the good tools need somewhere to be used, somewhere people still gather, somewhere traditions become community instead of memory. One of my closest friends spends his vacation every year in Houston. Not on the beach in Galveston Island, not in the malls or restaurants or on a golf course. He uses his vacation days to work. For nearly 30 years, he served on the livestock committee at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. He pays his own expenses, he works long days, gets home exhausted, and can't wait to do it again next year. If you've ever attended a rodeo, you've probably noticed the announcer and the contestants, the bucking horses, and the lights. What you probably didn't notice were the thousands of volunteers who made all of it possible. Directing traffic, moving cattle, checking credentials, cleaning barns and mucking stalls, solving problems no one else ever sees. The first rodeos weren't productions. They were communities gathering around the work they already shared. And that spirit still exists. Not because someone is paid to protect it, because someone volunteers. Wallace Stegner often reminded us that the West was built through communities as much as through individuals. And I think he'd recognize this immediately. The people wearing volunteer badges aren't looking for recognition. They're simply making sure that there'll still be a rodeo next year. Communities create memories, but memories don't last very long unless somebody tells the stories. I've met people who knew almost everything about Western history. Dates, battles, brands, trails. But knowledge by itself isn't enough. History has to be brought to life. One woman I know does exactly that. She runs a museum where thousands of visitors walk through every year. Artifacts matter, documents matter, photographs matter. But she understands something even more important. Objects tell us what happened. Stories tell us why it mattered. She also happens to be a cowboy poet, which somehow feels exactly right. Long before history books, the West preserved itself around campfires. Somebody remembered, someone repeated the story, someone added one small detail, and before long, a generation understood where it all came from. Baxter Black once observed that cowboys never wasted a good story by telling it only once. And there's wisdom hiding inside that joke. Every culture survives because someone decides its stories are worth repeating. Today that happens in museums and on stages, in books and in songs, even through podcasts like this one. But every story eventually reaches a moment when someone younger raises a hand and asks another question. And that's where the future begins. Several years ago, I was volunteering on Saturdays at a horse barn. Most of my attention was on helping the kids. One of them especially caught my attention. She wasn't the loudest, she wasn't trying to impress anybody, she simply wanted to learn. If there was a gate to open from horseback, she wanted to know how to do it. If we were practicing with ropes, she'd ask one more question. If something didn't work the first time, she'd try again. Week after week, month after month, it became one of my favorite parts of the afternoons. Fast forward several years, and that little girl became a champion reining horse rider, earned a scholarship to compete on her college rodeo team, and watching that happen never surprised me. Not because she was naturally gifted, although she certainly had talent. It happened because curiosity was one of the greatest teachers anyone can ever have. Every generation worries that young people aren't interested anymore. People said that after barbed wire and after automobiles and tractors and television and after computers. Now they say it about smartphones. And every generation quietly produces another young cowboy, another horsewoman, another craftsman, another storyteller. Not because someone forced them, but because something inside them wanted to learn. And maybe that's why I don't worry quite as much when people tell me the West is disappearing. I've seen too many people quietly carrying it on. The ranch hand who chose responsibility over comfort. The craftsman who spent decades earning trust one piece at a time. The volunteer who still gives up his vacation simply because rodeos still matter. The storyteller who reminds us why our history is worth remembering. And the young horsewoman whose questions became a lifetime of learning. Now, none of them are famous. Most people listening will never know their names. And maybe that's exactly the point. The American West has never belonged only to the legends. It has always belonged to ordinary people who showed up. People who cared enough to do the work, to learn the craft, to tell the story, to teach the next generation. The truth is, cultures rarely survive because someone decides to preserve them. They survive because ordinary people quietly choose to live them. One ranch, one workshop bench, one rodeo committee, one story, and one curious young rider at a time. So the next time someone tells you the American West is over, tell them to take a look closer. It may not always wear the clothes that we're expecting, but it's still there. Still working, still teaching, still remembering, and I think that's something worth celebrating. Okay, before we ride out today, we've got just one more thing. Yep, that distinctive call from Buster the Bull means it's time again for our Cowboy Glossary term of the week. And this week's term is greenbroke. So a horse that's greenbroke has been started under saddle. It understands the basics, how to accept a rider, respond to simple cues, and begin working, but it's still learning. It lacks the experience that only time, patience, and miles can provide. There's an old saying that a horse can be broken a day, but it takes years to make one dependable. And in a way, that's true of people too. Every experienced ranch hand, every skilled craftsman, every rodeo volunteer was greenbroke once. Someone took the time to teach them. Someone answered their questions, corrected their mistakes, and trusted them with a little more responsibility each time. That's how traditions survive. Not because they're inherited automatically, but because one generation patiently teaches the next. Well, that's all for this episode of Way Out West. Thanks for riding with me here again. If you've enjoyed the episode, please follow, rate, and share the show with someone who loves the history, culture, and traditions of the American West. And if you'd like to see more of the work that we're doing, you can visit ridewayoutwest.com. And while you're there, take a few minutes to explore the Way Out West Journal, where we dive even deeper into the people, places, and history that continue to shape the West today. That's ridewayoutwest.com. Until next time, this is Chip Schweiger. reminding you that history tells us where the American West has been, but ordinary people decide where it goes next. We'll see you down the road.